Generating great looking flesh channels can be a difficult task, to say the least. That's why we've included many different options within QuikSeps Professional to generate these channels for you. The actions are called Auto Flesh Earth Tone Go number 1, 2, and 3. Then we have an action called Single Flesh Channel, which, well, obviously generates just one flesh channel that kind of covers all the bases. And then we have a Custom Flesh action that guides the user through pulling 3 different flesh tone channels of his choice during the color separation process. For now, let's run Auto Flesh Earth Tone 1 on this image and see what we get. Takes about 15 seconds or so for this action to complete. And once done, we'll zoom in and take a look at the color channels. As you can see here, we have 2 different Dark Flesh 7413s. Both the same PMS number, however, the channel is pulled in a slightly different method. Then we have a Middle Flesh 149, a Light Flesh 7520, and this viewing channel. It's basically like a black channel, but do not use it for anything aside from viewing your flesh. So let's turn on our 3 flesh channels. And it didn't do that bad of a job. Now let's try the initial Flesh 7413. And that one looks a little better. As you can see, we're missing a little ink here in the ear, and maybe a little bit of depth to the face. And by using the first 7413 channel, that fixed that. Now these channels can simply be shift dragged into your color separation to be used and output with your other color files. Now what I'd like to say about this number 1 action is that it doesn't work on all files. If you see the type of image we're working on here, very dark, deep flesh tones and earth tones, that's the type of file the number 1 action will work on. So if you run it and if you do not get good results, if it's missing areas, just don't use it and run one of the other actions, the number 2 or the number 3 or the custom flesh earth tone. The reason we put this action within QuikSeps is that it works well on many images like this, and it also doesn't select that much of the flesh outside of the intended range. So you're not going to have that much masking to do to get flesh ink, away from areas where it's not intended to print. Moving on to a new image, let's talk about the Auto Flesh actions number 2 and number 3. Now these generate flesh much differently than the number 1 action and will require masking after bringing the new flesh channels into your color separation. Since not only will we generate flesh within the intended range, such as the face and arm, but it's also going to extend into other parts of the image, such as the sky and the team name. There's no 2 ways around this. The difference between the number 2 and the number 3 flesh tone action is simply the number 2 generates 2 flesh tones, the number 3 generates 3. For now, let's run the number 2. Within about 10 seconds, it's done. We have 2 flesh channels, a 7413 and a 149, in addition to a viewing channel. Aside from flesh being contained within the face and arm, it's clearly apparent it's inside the sky and inside the team name and other areas. This will have to be deleted, and it's actually quite simple to do. What I did here is open up a file that contains a color separation for the baseball image. And we're going to move our new flesh channels into this destination file. Click on here, select our Move tool, hold down the Shift key, and just drag that channel into this file. Select the second flesh file and do the same thing. By holding down the Shift key and dragging, these channels will line up perfectly with your color separation. Let's move these up the channels. Dark flesh after the red, light flesh after the dark and see what we have. Now, we didn't turn our flesh channels on yet, but let's do so now. And as you can see, we have some really good looking flesh here, but the rest of the image is awful. And this is going to have to be deleted. And as I said earlier, it's quite an easy thing to do. Okay, we have to open our Paths palette and select New Path. Click OK. Take the pen tool from the Tools palette and start drawing your path. Now, depending upon your skill level, this will take anywhere from a few minutes to a little longer. After you do a few paths, you'll get very used to this technique, and you'll be knocking these things out very, very quickly. Now, we don't have to do the entire path here, but you get the idea. We're going to have to draw a path around the hand and arm area, around the face, and we're also going to have to get inside the eyes, since we don't want flesh in the whites of the eyes. Once completed, we have our path done surrounding this area, the eyes and the face. You could select it and deselect it. Now what we'll do is we're going to Control-click the path that we just created, which now has turned that path into a selection. Let's move our path palette out of the way. Go back to our Channels palette. Choose New Channel. It doesn't matter what it's called, the color or the opacity for this particular task. And click OK. Change our foreground color to black. Go to Edit, Fill, select Foreground Color with opacity at 100%. And deselect. What we have done here is created a mask channel named Alpha 1. We'll use this channel to target our flesh directly and delete all unnecessary, unwanted areas. Let's do that now. Let's turn on our color channels. Whoops. Let's go through that one more time. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're going to Control-click the Alpha 1 channel to select it. Go up to the Select menu and choose Inverse. What we've done here is made all areas outside the flesh live. Select the first channel, hit the Delete key. Select the second flesh channel and hit the Delete key. And deselect. Now we have some pretty good looking flesh, but I think there's one other thing we need to do. By clicking on and off the soft red, we can see that it's contaminating that flesh a little bit, and red could be a nightmare as far as flesh tones are concerned. So what we want to do here is to get rid of the red inside the flesh, and we'll do that by using the Alpha channel once again as a selection. Go back to the Alpha channel, Control-click to select it, but this time we're not going to choose Inverse from the Select menu, since we want to target the flesh range itself. Go to your red channel, hit the Delete key. And we'll probably want to get rid of the yellow also within the flesh. So let's go to the yellow channel and also hit Delete. And deselect. Zooming in, the flesh tone channels are accurate, however, they're a little dark for this particular image. And I'm not talking about dark as far as too much ink. I'm referring to the incorrect color ink. And that's very easy to adjust. Let's double-click the dark flesh channel click the color chip, which will bring up the picker, and let's select a lighter dark flesh for this image. And click OK. Now let's zoom out, get a look at the entire file. And I think we got a pretty good looking Bob Hope wearing a Cleveland Indians uniform. What I've done here is generate a separation with only one flesh channel for the file on the left using the single flesh channel action, and another separation using 3 flesh channels for the file on the right with the auto flesh earth tone action number 3. Let's take a look at both. This file contains only one flesh channel, the flesh 149. That action is guaranteed to capture all the flesh tones within your image, and is great for people with smaller machines or those who just want to image all the flesh with only one ink. The file on the right is very accurate and photographic and contains 3 flesh tones. We have the dark, the medium, and the light. So if absolute perfection is a must, by all means, generate your flesh tones using the Auto Flesh Earth Tone action number 3. Yes, you'll need 3 inks to image your flesh. However, it doesn't get any better than this. Although QuikSeps Professional does a great job of generating automated flesh channels, especially using the action number 2, 3, and single flesh channel action, at times you'd like to maybe do it yourself and select colors that are actually within your image. Now, I wasn't going to include this action with QuikSeps, however, many people have requested that I should. So what this action is called Custom Flesh Earth Tones Go. This will guide the user through using the color range function within Photoshop to select 3 different flesh tones, a dark, a medium, and a light. It then takes that information, runs an RGB calculation on it, and generates a relatively smooth and accurate channel. Let's give it a shot and see what we get. Follow the instructions on screen. Now when the first color range box comes up, we want to pick the darkest color, almost brown, maybe reddish. And this looks like it's probably it about there. You can move your fuzziness slider around to select more or less. This would be far too much. This would be far too little. Let's get it right about here and click OK. Okay, now QuikSeps has generated the channel. Click Continue. The next channel we need to select is the medium flesh. Let's see if we can locate that. This looks pretty close. Check our fuzziness, maybe get a little bit more of it, and click OK. To the final channel, we need a whitish, almost pinkish flesh. So let's see if we can locate that. Now that's pretty pinkish. Let's bring our fuzziness back. Since we're starting to select, as you can see, white area that we don't want ink in, we want to bring that back until we no longer see that, and click OK. All the flesh channels have now been selected. Okay, now let's take a look and see how we did. We have our black viewing channel here, and we have a dark flesh, middle, and light. And that's fairly realistic. Let's zoom in. About the only thing we need to do is select each flesh channel and get rid of the flesh within the eyes, since we don't need it in there. Unlike the automated flesh channel actions, we have very little flesh data coming outside of its intended range. So this can probably just be deleted with your eraser tool. Now this can take a little bit of practice to get very good at, but in time I'm sure everyone will master it. However, just keep in mind that the auto flesh actions, especially the number 2 and 3, and if you do just need one flesh channel, the single flesh channel action is probably the way to go, as it guarantees all data to be selected and generated within those new flesh channels. CMYK True Process is probably the first form of color separations used for photorealistic printing on t-shirts, and it can also be the most difficult to master. The reason being is that process color is held hostage to dot gain problems on press. It's very easy for a CMYK separation to start running dark. And the reason for that, at least the reason most of the time, is that many printers will just take their original RGB file, convert to CMYK in Photoshop, output the films, and then go to press with it. Well, those separations will never ever work. This type of file here is the ideal piece of artwork or sampling piece of artwork to use for process color. It's more or less pastel. It's very busy. There's no reference color, more or less, and there's no large solid blocks of color. These are things you would like to avoid at all costs when deciding if a job, suits process color well or not. In fact, if a customer came to me with this piece of artwork and wanted it printed, I would definitely choose process color over simulated process for a lot of reasons. Number one, I could get closer to the original with true process as opposed to simulated. In addition, I would be using a lot fewer inks. With process, I could probably run this with a base, a highlight, and the 4 process colors. With simulated, this may take 9, 10, 11 colors and still not look, as good. In fact, it's probably not a good idea for simulated at all. It would probably be a toss-up between process and index. And if given the choice, I would have to take process. Now, you really can't do process on darks. No matter what you've seen at the shows, it's impossible. The people who can do it have exotic techniques they've developed over years and years and years to allow them to do it. But for you and me, let's stick with white and pastel shirts only when attempting to print true process color. Okay, now let's run a process separation on this file and see how it does. Depending upon computer speed and file resolution, as usual, this will take about 10 to 20 seconds. The action generates a white underbase, process yellow, magenta, cyan, black, highlight, and a dark highlight, which really comes in handy with true process. Now let's turn on all the channels sequentially. Now, if you look closely, you might think it's slightly washed out when compared to the original. It's supposed to look that way for a lot of reasons. So just trust the separation and go to press with it. Regarding the dark highlight, let's turn that on. As you can see, that muted the image much more than the normal highlight. What the dark highlight does, it helps control flesh tones, magentas, and other problematic areas. So if you're running a CMYK job and it starts to look a little reddish or grainy, in addition to doing things like basing back your inks, especially the magenta, you may want to try running a job with the dark highlight. The dark highlight could eliminate most, if not all, problems. There's one other thing I'd like to mention with process color. Is even if we're running a white shirt, I always run a white underbase when doing process for a few reasons. One being that process inks are very transparent. They're very thin. They don't have an enormous amount of pigment. They're quite unlike a regular spot plastisol. Due to that, after your shirt is washed once, twice, maybe 3 times, it's going to experience a lot of fabric fibrillation. Little fibers coming through the print on the shirt. And that's going to make your nice, bright-looking process color print into a washed-out-looking, dusty image. Also, printing that white underbase immensely helps you control that image on press. You'll be surprised the difference between running a process job with and without that underbase, even on whites. And that's about it for process color. You see, it was pretty simple after all.